Country songs often have a sense of humour in their title. For example, "Mama, get the hammer, there's a fly on Papa's head." Or, "If you don't leave me alone, I'll go and find someone else who will." An old country song without any humour sums up Daniel 5. Turn out the lights, the party's over. Put another way, most hotels offer a wake-up call, but the term wake-up call has become a saying about a warning sign. When the Titanic took its maiden voyage, several ships sent messages warning of icebergs. All those messages were wake-up calls. Be careful, there's ice where you're at. The communications officer aboard the Titanic wired back to one of those messages saying, shut up, you're jamming our signal, I'm busy, I'm working." The real wake-up call came when that ship struck an iceberg and 1,500 lives were lost. They had all the information, but didn't put it into action. Well, now Daniel 5 is about King Belshazzar. He has all the information to avert a major disaster, but he doesn't listen. He needs to wake up. I believe that God seeks to get people's attention throughout life in different ways, some more dramatic than others, all trying to avert a fatal destination, an eternity without him. Romans 13 says, it's high time to awake out of sleep. And coming now to Daniel 5, it's essentially an interruption. A party is going on and God interrupts the party with some divine graffiti. A hand writes a message on the wall. The party is interrupted. Let me give a few historical thoughts important to this text. For centuries, the book of Daniel was ridiculed because of chapter 5. Comments would say, well, Belshazzar appears in Daniel 5 but doesn't appear anywhere in secular history. We have Nebuchadnezzar, and after him 3 successive kings in swift order, and finally the last king of Babylon, Nabonidus, and then the kingdom falls in 539. So King Nabonidus, not King Belshazzar, was the king of Babylon when it fell. And yet Daniel 5 says Belshazzar was the king. So they laugh, saying, you can't believe the Bible. This book makes people up that never existed historically. All of that scoffing stopped in the year 1854 with archaeological digs in southern Iraq. They found a clay cylinder called the Nabonidus cylinder, and the writing etched around the circumference was a prayer for a long life and health for King Nabonidus and his eldest son, Belshazzar. The critics were silenced. And what we have discovered in the last 50 to 100 years is that not only did he exist as the eldest son, but he was also the king of Babylon, placed on the throne by his father, Nabonidus, while he himself was away from the city. For 14 of the 17 years of his reign, Nabonidus didn't even live in Babylon. So, in his place, as second in command, he placed Belshazzar as the king of Babylon. Now, why is all that important? Because twice in Daniel 5, verse 7 and 16, there's the mention of being the third ruler of the kingdom. Anyone able to interpret this writing on the wall will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Why not second? Because he was second. His dad was first. He was the second. And whoever gets this right can be the third. Our Bible is reliable. Right now, only 1% of all archaeological knowledge in the Middle East has been uncovered, but they're digging it up every day. So, in Daniel 5, we have an interpretation from God, and that's how it begins in the first few verses. A wild party, and then a weird picture, followed by a wise prophet and weighty announcement. Look at the wild party. 1,000 guests, not including the women. Belshazzar is tasting the wine, and it's taking away his inhibitions. He commanded for the goblets his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the Jerusalem temple to be brought and drunk from. When it says Nebuchadnezzar his father, this is written in Aramaic, and in ancient Hebrew there's no word for grandfather. And they would often say father, meaning our ancestor, our father, our grandfather, or it could be our great-grandfather. Same with the word son. Just like Jesus is called the son of David. He's not really the son of David. He's the ancestor of David. So you find son, you find father, and it could mean grandfather. As they drank the wine from these goblets, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. This is a very strange party. You know why? The year is around October 539 BC. At the time of this party, the enemy had surrounded the walls of Babylon. The Medes and Persians are at the gates looking for a way to breach the walls and take the city. They've already had Nabonidus, the king of Belshazzar, his son, is inside now, and they're after him, having got his father. And they've surrounded that city, thick walls. So, what does the government do when they're down and out? Have a party and bring in the wine. Why a party? The king can see the sagging morale in the faces of his people. The city is surrounded, so to boost the sagging morale, he throws a party. And at this party, there's a lot of wine and women. And people can say and do stupid things when they're intoxicated. Alcohol contributes to 50% of all suicides, over 50% of violent crimes, 50% of all traffic accidents involve alcohol, and 60% or more of all emergency room admissions are related to alcohol. So, here's the playboy king. They're having fun, praising the gods of all their Babylonian belief systems. And the king has a bright idea. He's thinking, why are we drinking from ordinary cups when there's gold and silver mugs over in that palace that my grandfather Nebuchadnezzar took from Jerusalem? Let's use those. Now, it wasn't just a drunk man's whim. It was an absolute defiance of God. The practice to defy the gods of the peoples that you have taken over was a common practice. And showing the superiority of the Babylonian gods over other nations, especially when you have another nation wanting to overtake you at that very moment, would have been important to him. It was a calculated insult. You need leaders who think clearly when they make a decision for a nation. Proverbs 20 says, wine produces mockers. There's a whole room full of mockers in chapter 5. So it's a wild party in Babylon, resulting in a weird picture. Someone told me of their visit to Babylon. They were taken into a huge room. The archaeological guide said, you are standing in the very room where the handwriting on the wall appeared at Belshazzar's feast the night Babylon fell in 539 BC. And what was interesting was the plaster, white plaster, still on the walls, just as the Bible says. It was there. Now, I don't know if anyone has ever kept a record of the shortest time it takes to sober up an individual, but I would say chapter 5 might be the winner. A hand appeared, not attached to a body or arm, just a hand that wrote something on the walls. There was a black and white movie called The Crawling Hand. An astronaut died and was buried, and his hand came back from the grave and strangled people. The crawling hand. Well, here's the writing hand on the wall. And the Bible describes what we know would happen medically. Adrenaline would rush into the king's body, and that would prime that fight or flight reflex that often makes a person sick to their stomach and their heart pump. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his knees knocked together and his legs gave way. He knows what's happening outside the walls of the city, but he also knows something about his grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, and how God humbled him. When a person is guilty, he sees all of his life through that lens, as Hamlet says. Conscience does make cowards of us all. Particularly true if we're not walking right with the Lord. So, he brings all these lame advisors of Babylon who can't read the inscription. Now, I know somebody is going to ask me, well, why couldn't they even read? They may not be able to interpret what it means, but why couldn't they read what it says? Maybe it was some sort of language that they were unfamiliar with. It could be because there is nothing in the text that suggests the graffiti was visible. Surely everybody's knees would give way if they understood the writing, not just the king. Either way, this gives to us an incredible picture of the natural man. You know what I mean by the natural man? Bible calls a natural man not a man who doesn't wear deodorant. A natural man is who we are by nature as fallen human beings apart from Jesus Christ. Unsaved people are called the natural man or woman. 1 Corinthians 2 says, the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God. They are foolishness to him, nor can he know them. They are spiritually discerned. That's why unbelievers hear a sermon, they hear scripture and say, I don't get this. The reason they couldn't get the message was that they didn't know the God who sent it. Suppose you walk through a front door and see a message on the telephone pad, called, cancelled, coming. If you don't know the person, well, you're not going to understand the objective. You don't grasp its meaning. But let's say I walk in and I know the person the message is from, and I know its purpose. Oh, called, cancelled, coming. That's Aunt Joan. She's called because she's cancelled a hair appointment and is coming to us earlier than we thought. Do you see it? Knowing the person and purpose gives the message sense. Just so with the Bible. People just don't get it because they don't know the God of the Bible. And Daniel will figure out the message. They can't figure it out. It's a picture of the natural man. I can't resist this. Can you think of another instance in the Bible where God writes something? John 8. They bring to Jesus a woman caught in adultery and say, the law says that this woman must be stoned. What do you say? You know what Jesus said? Nothing. He bent down on the ground and took his finger and started writing in the sand. And they saw what he was writing, and they all walked away convicted. The question has always been, what did Jesus write? The answer, we don't know. Maybe he wrote their names and their secret sins. Maybe he just started unveiling their secret indiscretions. Or perhaps, just a thought, he wrote on the ground what we're reading in this chapter. Mene, tekel, upharsin. You've been weighed in the balances and found lacking. It would have been a story they as Jewish leaders were familiar with and would have got the point across. But they could not interpret what this is all about here. So they are scared. I have a question for us. Could there be handwriting on the wall in our life? That is, has God been trying to get our attention for a while? Maybe a crisis, maybe a close call, an accident, but we're still here. Maybe a family-related crisis, a work-related crisis. You know, some people need shaking before God really gets their attention. In a crisis, the first question you're tempted to ask is, how can I get out of this? Here's a new question you need to ask. What can I get out of this? Is God trying to say anything to me? If so, what? So, a wild party, a weird picture, and now a wise prophet. The queen came in. Interesting. Who is this queen? It can't be his wife, because all his wives were at the party drinking with him. This queen speaks up. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. I think it was the Queen Mother. She says the same thing about Daniel that Nebuchadnezzar had said years before. And Daniel gets brought in. It's amazing to me that Belshazzar either didn't know who Daniel was or knew who Daniel was and has up to this point completely ignored him. We have here a picture of the world, the natural man and the Christian. The world doesn't want to hear what Christians have to say. They certainly don't want to hear what preachers have to say. It's funny when I go to places and people introduce themselves and, well, what do you do? Well, I'm a doctor, or I'm an engineer. What do you do? I'm a preacher. They don't know what to do with that. You're not, are you? Would you like me to preach to you for half an hour to prove it? No, thank you. I'm not the religious sort. I usually reply with a smile, I didn't know that there was a religious sort. And you have known this in your life where people aren't interested in what you believe as a Christian, haven't you? They don't really care about what you have to say until the bottom drops out of their life. And then they'll come to you. Joseph Parker was a great London preacher, and he wrote this: preachers of the word, you will be wanted someday by Belshazzar. You are not at the beginning of the feast, but you will be there before the banqueting hall is closed. The king will not ask you to drink wine, but he will ask you to tell him the secret of his pain and to heal the malady of his heart. Abide your time. You're a nobody now, but the preacher will have his opportunity. They will send for him when all other friends have failed. So, Daniel is brought in because the Queen Mother says so. Belshazzar pours it on. When Daniel comes in, he'll get everything if he knows the interpretation. Daniel knows that all the gifts are about to be a waste of space very soon. So he can keep them. But he will read the writing. Daniel is in his 70s or 80s. He's been there, done that. Don't want the gold, don't want the position. Had it all, couldn't care less about it. If you call for a man of God, expect a sermon, not a pat on the back. He didn't say, "Oh, king, live forever, long live the king," because the king's going to die in a few hours. Daniel has predicted the fall of this kingdom, so he gets right to it. Daniel levels 3 heavy charges against this king. 1, there are things you knew and you have pushed them aside. You knew about Nebuchadnezzar, your grandfather. You knew what God did to him and how he glorified God at the end of that. You've known all this. You have disregarded knowledge. God judges individuals and nations depending on the light of knowledge they have. Can I just say, quit worrying about the people who have never heard the gospel. I hear that all the time. What about the people who have never heard? You have heard. I have heard. I have a different kind of light. God made them, and God will have to worry about them himself, and it's no worry to him. He knows what he will do. I'm not worried. Of course, I want to get the gospel to them. Well, what about the people who have never had a Bible? We have one. God judges us depending on the light we've received. How many sermons have we heard in our life? How many have we had in our country? Occasions, thousands of occasions through churches, thousands of churches, to hear sermon after sermon, truth after truth is accessible. Our nation has light and will be judged accordingly. Remember, Jesus lived in Galilee. What town was his headquarter town? It was Capernaum, right? And there were 3 little villages, Capernaum, Bethsaida, and Chorazin. They're just little villages next to each other. They heard what Jesus said and saw what he did. And you know what? They were indifferent to it all. So one day, you know what Jesus did? Woe unto you, Capernaum and Chorazin and Bethsaida. You have been exalted up to heaven. You will be brought down to hell. For if the works that were done in you had been done in Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have repented long ago. They were judged according to the light that they sinned against. So, charge number 1 for Belshazzar. You've disregarded knowledge. Charge number 2. You didn't do this in ignorance. You did this in defiance. You were shaking your fist at the God that you knew humbled your grandfather. This is some sermon. Again, Daniel is in his 70s or 80s. He doesn't care. And charge number 3, you're honouring idols which cannot see or hear or understand. King Belshazzar, you pray and sing to a bunch of statues. They can't answer back. They can't hear a word you're saying. Verse 23, but you do not honour the God who holds in his hands your life and all your ways. In the 1800s, William Henley, a secularist poet, wrote a poem called Invictus. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. No, we're not. And he didn't feel that way when his young daughter lay dying. Belshazzar, at the end of the line, everyone, you're going to have to deal with God. Belshazzar, you will. So will the people around you. So will we. What a moment this must have been. And now comes the weighty pronouncement. Mene, tekel, parsin. It means numbered, weighed, divided. You're finished. meaning God has numbered your days and your number is up. In a few hours, this king will be dead. His number is up. He's been numbered. You know our days are numbered? Psalm 90 says, "Teach us to number our days that we might gain a heart of wisdom." How about doing that right now? Just imagine our life as a single day, starting at 7 in the morning. At 15, we're 2 minutes past 10 in the morning. When 25, it's 12:42 in the afternoon. When we're 35, it's 3 o'clock. At 45, it's 5:16 early evening. 55, 7:34. 65, 5 minutes to 10. 70, 11 p.m. 80, don't ask. Our days are numbered. As Paul said, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. And the word here, tackle, implies to weigh something on the scale and to find it to be light. Here's God's standard. You put something on the scale like his life, Belshazzar, you're a lightweight. And the final word, peres, and it says passing, numbered, weighed and divided. Peres, for your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Remember, at this very second, outside the walls of Babylon, the Medes and the Persians have surrounded the city. A general came up with an ingenious idea. He thought, well, the river Euphrates runs right through the town of Babylon. It's an impregnable city. We can't get through the walls, but we can get under them. He dammed up the river upstream, diverting the river into a swamp. The water level in the town went down to about knee height. The entire army walked underneath the wall, through the river, killing the guards. And by the time the party is over, the entire army of the Persians are in the town. One historian says there wasn't even a spear thrown that night in the fall of Babylon. The last official act of Babylon was to honor a man of God. And the God of this man was bringing his kingdom down. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. That very night, Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. There's a last night for everyone. There's a last meal for each one of us. There's a final statement that will come from our mouth. There's a last breath for everyone, and then eternity. In the meantime, our life is being weighed on God's scale. Is it substantive? Is there integrity? Is there depth? Because one day we will stand not in a party hall, but in a judgment hall, with handwriting in books. Revelation 20. The books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Oh my. That's some handwriting. But don't stop listening now, because here's the good news. Colossians 2. We can be forgiven all our sins through Christ, and having cancelled the written code with its regulations that was against us and that stood opposed to us, he took it away, nailing it to the cross. The handwriting on the wall that said, "You're guilty, you're guilty, you're guilty." Jesus took it upon himself and nailed it to the cross. So, on that final day, that judgment day. For a lot of people, the party is over. But for other people, the party's just begun. Eternity will hold the biggest, coolest party ever. The picture Jesus gives is of a banquet. But for some, the party is over. God's been trying to get your attention. Maybe this sermon, maybe this message. Maybe he said, I love you so much. I want to invade your life and show you what I have for you. I wonder what you'll say to him. Will we say, shut up, you're jamming my signal, I'm busy, I'm working, like they did on the Titanic? Or will we say, oh yes, please, take over my life?